British TV presenter Anne Robinson has confirmed she is in a relationship with the Queen's ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles.
The morning frost was still thick on the gravel driveway at Burke Hall. It was barely 5, and the house was completely dark. Just after hearing that, Prince William walked up the stone steps of the estate office, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Strangely, he did not call ahead. He did not alert the house staff. He just handed a signed document to the head of security on duty. The instruction was brutal in its simplicity. Revoke every single electronic key fob assigned to Queen Camilla's personal team. Prince William has just done something his father never had the courage to do. It wasn't just the news, but what made everything explode was what came out about Camilla and her ex-husband. Secrets surfaced that are so dark and so personal to William that they left him absolutely furious. By sunrise, Camilla private secretaries and assistants were officially locked out of the property. This was a sudden, aggressive eviction, driven by newly uncovered evidence, and the fragile peace inside the family was officially dead. The sovereign guard change. The local security team at Burke Hall stood around the main desk in complete disbelief as the digital database began updating in real time. On the wall monitors, a long list of access profiles began to flicker, from active green to a sharp, restrictive red. Names belonging to senior advisors, private dressmakers, and personal secretaries who had spent years treating the estate as their own private headquarters were systematically scrubbed from the system. The head of security stared down at the paperwork Prince William had left on the desk, noting the official seal of the Duchy of Cornwall. Under the strict terms of royal property laws, this specific estate belonged entirely to the Prince of Wales, giving him the ultimate legal right to control who crossed the threshold. William did not wait in the office to watch the technical team complete their work. He walked out onto the gravel path, his boots crunching softly in the early morning silence as the fog began to drift through the pine trees. He knew that this move would trigger a massive constitutional crisis within hours, but he had spent the last 48 hours reviewing files that left him with absolutely no choice. For months, the relationship between Kensington Palace and Queen Camilla's personal household had been simmering with quiet tension, but it had never burst into the open quite like this. By changing the locks and cutting off access before the daily staff even arrived for work, William was sending a clear signal that the old boundaries were completely gone. The local wardens quickly realized that this was not a drill when a specialized team of protection officers from London arrived to take over the main gate. These were men and women who answered directly to William's personal command, completely bypassing the standard rotation of officers assigned to the wider Balmoral estate. They moved with quiet efficiency, setting up new perimeter checks and rolling out a completely different set of communication channels that could not be monitored by the King's telecommunication staff at Clarence House. The message was clear to everyone on the ground that the house was now under a total military and digital lockdown. This sudden development brings us straight to the launch of our first major macro loop. What specific piece of newly uncovered evidence forced Prince William to take this aggressive public step right now? What did his personal legal team discover buried in the estate's administrative logs that justified a complete security lockout against the king's wife? To understand the sheer weight of what was happening, one had to look at how Burke Hall had been managed over the past few years. The property had always been a deeply personal sanctuary for King Charles and Camilla, a place where they could escape the rigid protocols of London and entertain their closest friends away from the public eye. Because it felt so private, the daily operations had slowly drifted away from the strict oversight that governed places like Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Camilla's inner circle had gradually taken over the management of the guest lists, the staff hiring, and the local transport contracts, operating a parallel court that felt entirely independent of the rest of the royal family. But that independence had recently caught the attention of the duchy auditors. A routine review of the estate's logistical records had flagged several massive anomalies that simply did not align with standard royal guidelines. When William saw the initial reports, he quietly ordered a full, deep-dive investigation into the property's usage logs and financial routing files, keeping the entire operation hidden from his father's advisors to prevent any premature leaks. The findings that landed on his desk just 2 days prior were so compromising that his legal team advised him to act instantly to protect the financial integrity of the crown. As the sun finally began to break through the thick Scottish mist, the first of Camilla's personal staff members pulled up to the outer checkpoint in a silver estate car. It was her long-serving private assistant, a woman who was used to driving straight through the gates with a wave to the guards. This morning, however, she found the heavy wooden barriers firmly down, and two unfamiliar officers stepping out from the guardhouse with their hands resting flat on their belts. They did not ask for her name. They simply informed her that her access privileges had been suspended by a direct order from the landlord, and that she needed to turn her vehicle around immediately. The assistant sat in her car in total shock, her phone already in her hand as she tried to make sense of what she was being told. She attempted to dial the internal extension for the main house, but the line went straight to a pre-recorded error message, confirming that even the internal communications had been severed. Within minutes, a flurry of panicked phone calls began bouncing between the local cottages and the senior offices in London, as Camilla's inner circle realized that they were completely blind to what was happening inside the perimeter. William watched the silver car turn around from the balcony of the main house. He knew that the news would reach his father within the hour, and he knew the immense emotional strain it would place on a family already dealing with significant personal and health challenges. Yet, his expression remained entirely neutral as he turned back inside to meet with his chief legal advisor, who was already spreading a fresh set of unredacted ledgers across the dining room table. This brings us to the very edge of the mystery that was about to consume the entire royal household. The locks had been changed, the staff had been turned away at the gate, and the sovereign guard change was officially complete. The future king had taken his stand, and the battle lines were drawn right across the threshold of the family's most treasured sanctuary, leaving the rest of the palace scrambling to find out exactly what William had found in the dark. The secret of the royal ledger. The dining room table inside Burke Hall was completely covered in printouts of digital spreadsheets and bank routing sheets. Prince William sat with his sleeves rolled up, his eyes scanning the columns of numbers that his financial team had highlighted in the yellow ink. Beside him, a senior investigator from the Duchy of Cornwall's Forensic Accounting Unit scrolled through a secure digital tablet, bringing up encrypted communications that matched the specific dates on the bank sheets. Every document pointed toward a systematic, unauthorized commercial exploitation of the private royal estate that had been running quietly under the radar for nearly 18 months. To the outside world, Burke Hall was simply a quiet Scottish retreat where the king and queen spent their summers walking in the hills and hosting private family dinners. But the unredacted financial logs told a completely different story, revealing that the estate had been transformed into an exclusive, highly lucrative venue for wealthy overseas clients. The ledger detailed secret bookings where global corporate executives and private billionaires paid massive fees to stay in the historic house, dine using the family's private crystal, and tour the restricted grounds under the guise of official charitable events. William focused on a specific entry from October of last year. A prominent overseas technology firm had been granted total exclusive access to the house and grounds for an entire weekend while the king was resting in London. The public diary for that weekend showed absolutely no official royal engagements at Burke Hall, yet the ledger showed a transfer of £75,000 paid directly into a newly established private trust fund. This fund sat entirely outside the official accounts of the Duchy of Cornwall or the Privy Purse, bypassing the strict parliamentary oversight committees that monitored royal commercial activities. This brings us directly to our very first sharp micro-loop. Did Queen Camilla personally authorize these lucrative side deals, or was she completely blindsided by the actions of her own close staff? To find the true answer, William's team had to trace the administrative trail back to the initial setup of the private trust. The documents showed that the fund had been registered under the names of two senior members of Camilla's personal household staff, including her long-serving private secretary. These individuals had used their unique positions to organize the luxury hosting packages, using the estate's resources, chefs, and housekeeping teams, while billing the clients through the private entity. They had managed the entire operation using personal email accounts, ensuring that no record of the bookings ever appeared in the main palace scheduling computers. Here is the resolution to our intense micro-loop. The forensic investigation revealed that Queen Camilla was completely blindsided by the full scale of the commercial operation. But she was not entirely innocent of its origins. 6 months prior, her staff had approached her with a proposal to raise independent funds to support her private countryside charities, arguing that the official palace budget was too restrictive. Camilla had given them verbal permission to explore unique fundraising ideas, trusting her inner circle completely. However, she never reviewed the itemized details, signed any commercial contracts, or realized that her staff had turned a historic crown property into a high-priced private resort for billionaires. She trusted her team to keep things modest and dignified, but they had exploited her verbal sign-off to its absolute limit, believing that no one would ever dare to audit the Queen's personal household accounts. They had completely underestimated the vigilance of the Prince of Wales. As the primary landlord of the Duchy lands, William viewed this unauthorized commercial activity as a massive violation of trust and a severe breach of constitutional law. If the British media discovered that a private royal estate was being rented out for secret corporate deals, while the taxpayer funded the property's security and basic upkeep, the resulting public scandal would be catastrophic for the credibility of the monarchy. William tapped his finger against the tablet screen, pointing to a series of internal emails between the staff members. The messages discussed upcoming summer bookings for the current year, including a massive corporate retreat scheduled for a major international luxury brand. The staff had already accepted a significant financial deposit, and the guests were scheduled to arrive at the estate within the week. This explained the absolute urgency behind William's early morning guard change. He had to shut down the property and revoke the staff's access cards immediately to prevent the corporate guests from arriving and creating an irreversible legal precedent. The senior investigator pulled up a final spreadsheet showing the total amount of money that had flowed through the unauthorized trust over the past year. The figures were staggering, totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds that had been completely hidden from the official royal accountants. The money had been used to fund lavish lifestyles for the staff involved, including private travel and high-end purchases, all under the cover of the Queen's name. William stood up from the table and walked over to the window, looking out at the heavy iron gates where the extra guards were now stationed. He knew that the revelation of this secret ledger would cause immense distress to his father, who was already dealing with heavy burdens. But William's priority was the long-term survival of the institution. He could not allow a parallel, corrupt financial operation to run inside a historic royal home, no matter how close the perpetrators were to the throne. He instructed his legal team to package the unredacted ledger and the forensic report into a secure digital file. This evidence would serve as his ultimate defense when the inevitable confrontation with London took place. The secret of the ledger was out, the loop was resolved, and the future king was prepared to use every piece of data he had to enforce a completely new standard of discipline across the entire royal household. The broken Sandringham Pact. The library at Burke Hall felt colder as the morning progressed, despite the fire crackling in the stone hearth. Prince William walked over to a heavy wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, unlocking it with a key he kept on his personal chain. He pulled out a vintage leather-bound document that had been transferred from the main family vault at Sandringham just 2 years earlier. This was not a public piece of legislation, nor was it a document that had ever been viewed by a government minister. It was a private family treaty signed by King Charles and Prince William just weeks before the official coronation ceremony in London. This brings us directly to the launch of our second major macro loop. How will King Charles react when he discovers his son has completely locked his wife out of a beloved family property, breaking a sacred family agreement? The fallout from this decision would test the absolute limits of the relationship between the sovereign and his heir, threatening to cause a permanent rift at the highest level of the realm. The document William held in his hands was known inside the inner circle as the Sandringham Pact. It had been drafted during a period of intense negotiation regarding the future transition of power and the division of the massive royal property portfolio. At the time, Charles was deeply concerned about securing long-term stability and comfort for Camilla, wanting to guarantee that she would always have access to the historic properties she loved, regardless of any future changes in the line of succession. William had agreed to the terms of the pact, but he had insisted on adding several highly specific, legally binding clauses. One of those clauses stated that the lifetime access rights to any Duchy of Cornwall property, including Burke Hall, were strictly conditional upon the absolute preservation of the estate's dignity, financial transparency, and non-commercial status. The agreement explicitly laid out that if any part of the estate was ever used to generate unapproved private revenue, or if the property's security was compromised by the household staff, the landlord retained the immediate right to revoke all access privileges without advanced warning. William laid the leather-bound treaty open on the desk next to the forensic financial reports. The contrast between the two documents was absolute. The Sandringham Pact represented a solemn promise made between a father and a son to protect the heritage of their family. The secret ledger, with its unauthorized corporate bookings and hidden offshore bank transfers, represented a complete and flagrant violation of that promise. By allowing her inner circle to exploit the property for luxury business deals, Camilla's household had effectively triggered the emergency forfeiture clause that William had insisted on inserting into the treaty 2 years prior. The Prince of Wales knew that his father would view the lock change as a direct personal attack and a betrayal of the family peace. Charles was a man who deeply valued tradition, harmony, and the comfort of his wife, especially during a time when his own health required him to avoid unnecessary stress. He had trusted his advisors to ensure that all property arrangements were handled smoothly, and he had believed that the Sandringham Pact had settled the issue of Camilla's property rights for the rest of her life. William called his private secretary into the library, instructing him to prepare a secure digital copy of both the Sandringham Pact and the forensic audit report. He wanted the complete file delivered directly to the king's personal physician before it reached the political advisors at Clarence House. William wanted to ensure that his father was briefed on the situation in a calm, controlled environment, surrounded by medical staff who could monitor his well-being, rather than being blindsided by a frantic phone call from Camilla's panicked assistants. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside the palace administrative offices in London was becoming increasingly chaotic. The news of the lockdown at Burke Hall had finally reached the senior advisors, and a series of emergency meetings were already being convened behind closed doors. Camilla's team was furious, arguing that William's actions were completely illegal and a direct insult to the Queen Consort's dignity. They began drafting a formal counter-memorandum, intending to present it to the king the moment he woke up, demanding that he use his sovereign authority to override his son's order and restore the security access cards immediately. But William remained entirely unmoved by the gathering storm in London. He understood the immense risk he was taking by breaking the Sandringham Pact, but he believed that the long-term survival of the crown was far more important than short-term family comfort. If he allowed this commercial exploitation to continue, it would set a dangerous precedent that would completely undermine his own authority as the future king. He was determined to show that no one, not even the Queen Consort, was above the rules of financial accountability and public duty. He stood by the desk, his eyes resting on his father's elegant signature at the bottom of the old parchment. He knew that the next few hours would bring the most difficult confrontation of his life, as the machinery of the royal household prepared to fight back against his sudden display of authority. The leather-bound treaty remained open on the table, a silent witness to a broken promise that was about to push the entire royal family to the very brink of a historic civil war. The showdown at Clarence House. The heavy morning traffic on the Mall hummed outside the tall windows of Clarence House. But inside the private morning room, the silence was suffocating. A silver tray holding an untouched pot of tea and a porcelain cup sat on the low table between two silk-covered sofas. Prince William stood by the fireplace, his face completely pale as he looked across the room at Queen Camilla. The door had been locked from the inside by his personal protection team, ensuring that no private secretaries or palace advisors could interrupt the confrontation that had been building since 5 o'clock that morning. The personal confrontation between the Prince of Wales and his stepmother was explosive from the moment he walked through the door. Camilla sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped a copy of the security revocation notice that had been forwarded from the Scottish estate. She did not waste any time with polite greetings or formal royal protocols. She looked up at William and accused him of weaponizing the Burke Hall estate to launch a calculated, vindictive campaign to diminish her royal standing before the next transition of power took place. William did not raise his voice in response to her anger. He moved away from the fireplace and placed a secure digital tablet flat on the silver tray, right next to the cold teapot. He He told her to look at the screen, which displayed a series of unredacted emails and bank routing sheets that his forensic team had extracted from the estate's private servers just 24 hours earlier. He explained that this lockdown was not a personal grievance or a political maneuver. It was a direct, legally justified response to a massive breach of constitutional law that had been operating right under her nose. This brings us directly to our second sharp micro loop, while simultaneously resolving our first massive macro loop. Will Camilla attempt to use her immediate personal influence over the king to get William's security order officially overturned? And what was the exact piece of master evidence that forced William to take this aggressive, permanent step right now? To find the answer, we must look at the specific documents flashing on the tablet screen. As Camilla reluctantly leaned forward to scan the highlighted paragraphs, the true depth of the betrayal within her household was laid bare in plain words. The core piece of master evidence was not just a list of secret weekend bookings for wealthy corporate clients. It was a fully executed, multi-million-pound commercial licensing contract between a major international luxury brand based overseas and a private trust fund entirely managed by Camilla's closest advisors and relatives. The contract detailed a highly secretive plan to license the historic Burke Hall name, its exclusive image rights, and its botanical resources to launch a global line of luxury skincare and lifestyle products. The marketing strategy explicitly stated that the brand would use its unique connection to the Queen Consort's private sanctuary to market the line to ultra-wealthy buyers across Asia and North America. More damagingly, the internal emails showed that a prominent member of Camilla's immediate family had been allocated a substantial financial share in the corporate entity, ensuring that a significant portion of the global profits would flow directly into private hands, completely bypassing the official crown treasury. The revelation of this contract was the ultimate defense that shifted the balance of power instantly. When William confronted her with these specific names and routing logs, Camilla's defensive posture completely collapsed. She realized in a matter of seconds that her inner circle had gone far beyond a simple fundraising scheme for her private country charities. They had actively commercialized the heritage of the crown for private family enrichment, creating a massive conflict of interest that would completely destroy the financial credibility of the monarchy if it ever leaked to the British press. Now, we resolve our intense micro-loop regarding her influence over the king. Camilla looked up from the screen, her anger replaced by a sudden, cold sense of panic. She asked William if he had already shown these contract files to his father. William replied that the king's personal physician had already delivered a complete copy of the forensic report to his private quarters, along with a medical assessment confirming that the stress of a public financial scandal would be too dangerous for his current recovery regimen. Camilla realized that she could not use her influence to get the security order overturned. If she begged Charles to intervene, she would be forcing her husband to choose between his royal duty to protect the crown and his personal loyalty to her family, a choice that would inevitably destroy his peace of mind during a critical health battle. Camilla stood up from the sofa, her voice shaking as she asked what William intended to do with the contract files. William looked her directly in the eye, his tone completely steady and unyielding. He told her that the security lockdown at Burke Hall was permanent. The locks would not be changed back, and her personal household staff would remain completely barred from the property. He explained that the contract with the overseas luxury brand must be canceled immediately, with all initial deposits returned from the private trust fund to prevent any future legal challenges. He made it absolutely clear that her position as Queen Consort would be respected in public. But behind the closed doors of the palace, her parallel court was officially finished. Every single personal expense, travel log, and estate arrangement would now be subjected to a strict, line-by-line audit managed exclusively by his own financial advisors. Camilla was left standing in the center of the morning room, caught completely off guard by the sheer scale of the evidence William had gathered against her team. The showdown at Clarence House was over. The master evidence was revealed, and the future king had successfully used a single digital file to dismantle the financial independence of the Queen's inner circle in less than an hour. The new Policy A light rain began to fall over the gravel driveway at Burke Hall as a flatbed truck carrying heavy steel components pulled up to the perimeter. Within hours of Prince William's departure from London, a specialized team of structural contractors began installing a brand new, high-tech security gate system around the disputed boundary. These were not the traditional ornamental wooden barriers that had stood for generations. These were reinforced, industrial-grade steel structures fitted with advanced biometric scanners and direct fiber optic links to the main security hub at Kensington Palace. The message to the surrounding countryside, and to the remaining staff members watching from the estate edges, was absolute. The old era of relaxed casual access was officially over, replaced by an unyielding iron gate policy that marked a permanent shift in the balance of power. The physical transformation of the estate mirrored the structural overhaul occurring within the royal administration itself. The final fallout of the eviction was swift, brutal, and completely managed by William's inner circle. The forensic financial report had done its job, leaving Camilla's once powerful network of advisors completely isolated and unable to launch a counterattack. The private trust fund that had quietly handled the unauthorized corporate bookings was formally dissolved under the supervision of Treasury attorneys, and the lucrative commercial contract with the overseas luxury brand was canceled before a single product could ever reach a production line. Every penny of the initial corporate deposits was pulled back and returned to the investors, stripping Camilla's team of the financial leverage they had spent 18 months building. This brings us directly to the dramatic resolution of our second major macro loop. How did King Charles ultimately respond to this historic show of force by his heir? And how would his verdict shape the future map of the realm? The answer came late that evening, when a sealed leather pouch carrying the sovereign's personal cipher arrived at William's desk via a trusted personal courier. Inside the pouch sat a single page written on the king's private stationery. Charles had spent the afternoon alone in his quarters, reviewing the ironclad evidence his son had gathered against the Queen's household staff. He had looked at the signed contracts, the unredacted email trails, and the hidden bank routing logs that proved his own trust had been exploited to fund a parallel, commercialized court. The king faced a moment of profound personal grief, realizing that the peace he had fought for decades to maintain within his family had been shattered by the greed of his wife's closest advisors. Yet, despite his deep personal affection for Camilla, Charles ultimately refused to overturn his son's lockdown order. He picked up his pen and signed a master royal decree that officially ratified William's security directive. The king stood firmly with his heir, confirming that the preservation of the crown's integrity and the protection of historic assets from private commercial exploitation must always take precedence over personal family comfort. Charles realized that William had not acted out of malice or a desire for a family feud. He had acted as a modern landlord, enforcing the strict standards of accountability that the contemporary world demanded of the monarchy. By endorsing the eviction, the king was publicly validating the shifting balance of power in the realm, acknowledging that the future king-in-waiting was now the primary driver of the family's long-term survival strategy. The consequences for Queen Camilla were immediate, permanent, and deeply humbling. Her personal luggage, along with decades of private correspondence and personal belongings that had been accumulated during her time at Burke Hall, was quietly packed into unmarked vans and transferred back to Ray Mill House, her modest private country manor in Wiltshire. She faced a stark, downsized reality where her personal independence was strictly monitored and limited by a joint oversight committee controlled directly by William's financial team. The parallel court she had built was completely gone, leaving her to fulfill her remaining public duties under a heavy, restrictive allowance that required line-by-line verification for every single pound spent. As the contractors finished welding the final brackets onto the new steel gates at Burke Hall, Prince William stood in his study, looking at his father's signed decree on the desk. He had won a monumental victory, establishing a harsh, unyielding blueprint for his own future reign. He had proven that no one within the immediate circle was immune to the rules of transparency, and he had successfully insulated the institution from a potentially catastrophic financial scandal. The gate clicked shut, the locks were secure, and the future of the House of Windsor was officially under a completely new, ironclad order. The dramatic showdown over the historic Burke Hall estate has ended in an absolute historic victory for the Prince of Wales. By enforcing a strict iron gate policy and exposing the secret commercial exploitation running inside the family, Prince William has sent an unmistakable signal that accountability will always come before personal privilege in the modern monarchy. Queen Camilla now faces a heavily restricted, downsized reality behind palace doors, while her inner circle has been completely dismantled. But this intense family eviction leaves behind a massive, burning question for everyone watching. Was Prince William completely justified in locking his stepmother out of her favorite sanctuary to protect the financial integrity of the crown, or did his aggressive show of force cross a line into a ruthless family betrayal? The debate inside the realm